I thought this vacation would bring us closer together. Instead, it became the breaking point of our marriage. My wife and I have been married for 10 years. Life was good in many ways. We had two beautiful children who were our pride and joy, but over time something had shifted between us. Like most parents, we got caught up in the endless cycle of responsibilities, school runs, work, deadlines, doctor appointments, and everything else that came with raising a family. By the time we fell into bed at night, we were too exhausted to talk, let alone connect on a deeper level. Our days felt like they were running on a loop. I would wake up early to help get the kids ready for school while my wife handled breakfast. After work, we tag team dinner, homework, and bedtime routines. Then we'd sit silently in front of the TV before calling it a night. Weekends weren't much better, packed with errands and kids' activities. Somewhere in the middle of all this chaos, we had lost us. It wasn't always like this back when we were dating. My wife and I could spend hours talking, laughing, and just enjoying each other's company. But now, even when we did have free time, it felt like we didn't know what to do with it. Conversations had turned into discussions about bills or who would take the kids to soccer practice. That's when I suggested the vacation. A break from the routine sounded like exactly what we needed. No kids, no work, just the two of us reconnecting like we used to. I pictured long walks on the beach, candle at dinners, and lazy mornings where we could finally talk without interruptions. I believe this trip could help us remember why we fell in love in the first place. She agreed without hesitation. Maybe she felt the distance too, or maybe she was just ready for a change of scenery. Whatever the reason, we booked a tropical getaway, a chance to hit reset on our relationship. I was hopeful, even excited that this trip could bring us closer. We arrived at the resort early in the morning. The warm sun, the sound of waves crashing against the shore, and the laughter of carefree tourists filled the air. The beach was breathtaking, white sand stretching for miles and crystal clear water glimmering under the sunlight. For a moment it felt like the perfect escape. Our first day was filled with small joys. We walked hand in hand along the shoreline, letting the waves wash over our feet. She giggled when a small crab scurried past her toes, and I couldn't help but smile. It was the first time in weeks I'd heard her laugh like that. At dinner, we shared a table overlooking the ocean. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and we talked about how much we needed this break. It felt good, like we were starting to connect. But even amidst the smiles and laughter, I noticed the cracks. She spent more time on her phone than I liked, scrolling through social media or texting friends. When I asked her to join me for a sunrise walk the next morning, she shrugged it off, saying she needed to catch up on sleep. It wasn't a big deal, but it stung in those quiet moments when we weren't distracted by the beauty around us. The distance between us became more obvious. I caught her staring off into the distance more than once, her face thoughtful, almost wistful. When I asked her what she was thinking about, she would brush it off with a vague nothing important. I didn't press her, but deep down I wondered if she was as invested in this trip as I was. Still, I held on to hope. After all, we were here to rebuild what felt broken, to remember why we fell in love in the first place. I told myself that these small moments of distance didn't mean anything, that they were just a byproduct of the busy lives we'd been leading. This vacation would help us find each other again, or so I believed. But sometimes, when you ignore the cracks, they only get bigger. I was about to learn that no amount of sunsets or sandy beaches could fix what was already slipping away. The beach was alive with energy one evening, a perfect blend of chaos and joy. The sun had dipped low into the horizon, casting an orange glow over the ocean waves. The air was filled with a vibrant mix of sounds, the rhythmic beats of Afrock Caribbean music blaring from speakers, the crash of waves against the shore, and bursts of laughter from the crowd gathered for the night's festivities. Vendors moved through the throng, shouting out offers for cold drinks and snacks, their colorful carts adding even more flair to the lively scene. At the heart of the activity was a large, makeshift stage set up near the water, surrounding it by DIY torches that flickered in the warm evening breeze. A lively announcer, microphone in hand, hyped up the crowd, calling for participants to join the much anticipated dance competition. A semicircle of onlookers cheered, clapped, and whistled as volunteers stepped forward, eager to show off their moves. Among the crowd stood my wife, her face lit with the same excitement that had first drawn me to her years ago. She'd always loved dancing, and tonight was no different. She leaned toward me, her eyes sparkling. "I want to do it," she said, almost like a child asking for permission. Before I could answer, she was already slipping off her sandals and stepping toward the stage. One didn't think much of it at first. She loved these kinds of moments, being in the spotlight, feeling the energy of the crowd. It was just her way. I stayed back, settling into my seat with a drink in hand, watching her navigate the crowd with an eager smile. The announcer greeted her enthusiastically, handing her a numbered set, a tie around her waist. The crowd cheered louder as she climbed onto the stage. One found myself chuckling softly. This was typical of her, never wanting to sit still when there was a chance to have fun. Part of me admired her confidence, how she could throw herself into the moment without a second thought. Another part of me, the more reserved side, preferred to watch from a distance. I didn't mind. I was content to let her enjoy herself while I stayed in the background. Then he appeared, her dance partner. He was a young, charismatic local with a confident stride and an easy smile that could charm anyone. His sun-kissed skin and athletic build suggested he spent a lot of time in the ocean or playing sports. His movements were smooth and sure, like he owned the dance floor. Before the music even started, he introduced himself with a bow that made my wife giggle. She gave him her hand, and from that moment it was as if I didn't exist. They started dancing, and I watched as he twirled her effortlessly, making her laugh and blush. She seemed so carefree, so alive. For a moment I thought maybe this was good for her. She deserved to have fun. But as the dance continued, a canute began to form in my stomach. The way he held her waist, the way she leaned into him, it was too much. I stood there on the sidelines, clapping awkwardly with the rest of the crowd, but I felt like I was in a different world. The cheerful music felt like a mocking tune in my ears. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Each laugh, each lingering touch felt like a stab to my chest. Was this really about the dance, or was it about everything we'd ignored in our marriage? The distance, the silence, the way she often sought validation from others instead of me. The applause was deafening when the music ended, but all I could feel was anger as they bowed and exchanged smiles. I knew I had to say something. I walked up to her, trying to keep my voice calm, and said, "Can we talk?" For a minute she frowned but followed me a few steps away from the crowd. I could feel the heat of my frustration bubbling over. "What are you doing out there?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "This doesn't feel right. I think you should stop." She looked at me, her expression shifting from confusion to defiance. "What's the big deal?" she snapped. "It's just a dance. We're on vacation. Can't I have a little fun?" I tried to explain how it made me feel, but she didn't seem to care. Her tone grew sharper. "We're married, but you don't own me, and you're not going to tell me what to do." Her words hit me like a slap. I wasn't trying to control her. I just wanted her to see how much this was hurting me. But in that moment I realized she didn't care how I felt. This wasn't just about the dance. It was about how disconnected we'd become, how little she seemed to value our bond. I swallowed my pride and gave her one last warning. "If you go back out there and dance with him again, you won't find me here when you come back." She laughed as if I were making some kind of joke. Then without a word she turned and walked back to him. The music started again, and I stood there for a few seconds watching as she smiled and continued, completely oblivious to the storm raging inside me. As I stood there on the edge of the beach, watching her spin and laugh with a man we barely knew, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit for a long time. Our marriage had been broken for years. While she danced, I stood frozen, realizing how many times I had ignored the signs, the quiet dinners where we barely spoke, the nights spent scrolling on our phones instead of talking, the time she seemed distracted. I convinced myself it was just stress or exhaustion. That dance was just the final straw, a painful reminder that we had been drifting apart for far too long. I turned and walked back to the hotel. I didn't storm off. I didn't call out to her. What was the point? She didn't even notice I was gone. As I reached our room, the emptiness hit me hard. It was the kind of silence that made you feel lonelier than ever. I started packing my things, my Hands moving on autopilot. I didn't even have a plan, no destination, no idea what I do next. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there any longer. I couldn't stand to watch her prioritize a fleeting moment with a stranger over the man she promised to love forever.